Hello, welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. And today we're going to talk about what's missing from your 2014 budget. It's that time of the year now. We're getting close to the end of September, and many supply chain executives, many companies are, more than likely wrapping up their budgets for 2014. They probably started, quite frankly, in back in July timeframe. And so you're putting together how much you're thinking and forecasting you're going to spend for transportation, how many people you're going to hire, what your labor requirements are, so on and so forth. But there's one topic that and line item that based on my research and my conversations with the executives, seems to be missing from a lot of supply chain logistics budgets. And if you've been a longtime follower of my writings on the blog, or just following me in general and some of the topics that I write and talk about, you've probably guessed by now what that topic is and what the answer to the question is. And the answer is what's missing from the budgets is investment in leadership development and education. For example, a couple of years ago, this was a topic just as I was launching my company at Allocate that is focused on leadership development, particularly for young professionals. As I was launching, the company, I went out and I surveyed about 35, 40, supply chain executives, and I just wanted to get a sense of where they were in terms of funding leadership development and education, and particularly when it came to budgets. And 52% of the executives that I surveyed did not have leadership development and education as a separate line item in their budget. They basically included it as part of discretionary spending, and we all know what discretionary spending means. It's that kind of bucket, that catch-all bucket that can easily go away, or you can easily steal from to fund other things. So really, it wasn't even something that merited its own line item budget. I also asked them, in the ideal world, if you could just name a budget amount, how much would you allocate annually for leadership development and education? And 78%, the vast majority, said that they would allocate $3,000 or more annually per professional for leadership development and education. But only 37%, actually, their companies actually allocated that amount. And almost 25% allocated $500 or less annually per professional for leadership development and education. $500 or less. Now think about that. $500 doesn't really get you very far these days. It barely covers the cost of airfare if you're going to be traveling somewhere. And if you think about the registration costs at conferences, we've got CSCMP conference coming up later in October. One of the premier opportunities for learning and networking, and the conference fee alone is 3 times that. It's about $1,500 if you registered early. So really, $500 is just a token amount, and it really doesn't lead very far. So then the question then becomes, well, why the underfunding, right? Why isn't leadership development and education something that is more prominent in budgets? It's something that's not being funded to a greater level. And one of the main reasons that was brought up in my conversations is that it is, quantifying the ROI of leadership development and education is not easy, and it's not straightforward. And of course, when you're talking to CEO, when you're talking to CFO, when you're talking to upper management, and you're trying to get funding for anything, whether it's an IT investment or some other project you're trying to do, you got to build a business case, and it's very difficult to build a business case. At least putting numbers, being able to equate, okay, I'm going to spend this amount in leadership development education. How's that going to impact our P&L and our balance sheet? How's that going to drive greater revenues? How's that going to reduce costs for our company? So on and so forth. And I think that's one of the big challenges that exist out there. In fact, I want to read to you kind of a comment that one of the executives that I interviewed from a leading manufacturing company said. And he said the key challenge in any year is defending the spend throughout the year. And this is, again, with regards to leadership development and education. Since a budget is a forecast, and a forecast is wrong, Whether just shooting to meet budget or meet a stretch, leadership development and education are an easy target for cost reductions. The ROI is immeasurable or at best difficult to consistently measure, and business tends to frown on leaps of faith. Okay, so that's a pretty powerful comment there, but I think it reflects the reality for a lot of executives out there. It's hard for them to connect those dots between leadership development and education and kind of the business benefit, right? I think everyone kind of in their gut knows that there's a benefit there, but it's those kind of fuzzy things that when times get tough and budgets get cut or the belt tightening occurs, that's one of the first areas that gets cut. So that's a key issue, but surprisingly, cost is actually not the biggest challenge. The biggest obstacle that companies have and executives have with regards to to leadership development and education. The biggest challenge, and this came through in the survey that I did, as well as my ongoing conversation with executives, is time constraints. Um, you know, the the reality is that even if you had the money, even if you had the proper funding, is that who has time to invest in leadership development and education when you're on the road half the time visiting clients and suppliers, when you're in meetings all the day, half the day, fighting out fires and trying to get that product out on time, or trying to meet unexpected increases in demand. Who has the time when you've got hundreds of emails that you get each day and phone calls that you get each day that you have to get back to? So for a lot of executives, and this was something that I heard firsthand, again, with the executives I was working with within my own company, is that even though they see the value in leadership development and education, they know it's important. um, they start the day and they end the day. They don't know where the day went, and they can't just really find the time, to invest in this. So that is really one of the I think one of the key hurdles and challenges involved with it, and obviously that translates into the budgeting side, as well. Because if you can't, if you're not going to be able to invest the time, then why invest the money? I think another interesting data point was Harvard Business School and the London School of Economics. They did a, a survey of 65 CEOs. And one of the interesting things that they found was that these CEOs spent 18 hours a week in meetings, 3 hours on phone calls, and 5 hours in business meals. And certainly that's true for the for the CEO, but it's also true for a lot of executives in general. We're just pulled in too many directions with our day-to-day activities and our day-to-day responsibilities, that kind of finding the time for leadership development education is a challenge. But let's say that you do have the time. Let's say that you do have adequate, funding for this. There's still some other important questions that you have to ask and you have to think about. And this was something that was brought to my attention by the director of transportation at a leading food company. And I'm just going to read to you kind of what he sent over to me as we were having a kind of a back and forth discussion via email around this topic. And he said, that they have the budget and they value leadership development and education, but they struggle with these three questions. The first question is, what do our people need to learn? Traditionally, we've focused on general leadership, software skills, and project management. But it seems now our biggest gaps are in things like strategic negotiations and financial modeling and analysis. So again, it's really kind of identifying those skills, that knowledge that's going to be important for your company relative to your strategic objectives. So this goes back to kind of building the business case and the ROI. It's really kind of taking a step back and really thinking through that question. The second question, what's the best way to learn it? Because obviously there's many different paths to learning and education. He wrote to me and said that this director of transportation, conferences are nice, but recently we've been looking more at smaller working sessions or collaborative share groups where people can get specific about issues. We do tuition reimbursements for some individuals, but are leaning towards focusing that on supply chain related courses rather than general MBA programs. So again, there's a lot of um, discussions and kind of back and forth between, do you invest in, traditional education programs and even MBA programs where, you might have more of a general and broad-based education, or do you focus on, some of these newer or other opportunities for learning, whether they're, very specific targeted classes or seminars, small workshops and so forth. So, how do you best, where do you invest that money, right? And what kind of what kind of learning programs and opportunities that are out there. So allocating that budget, that money, is a question that you need to ask. And then the third question is, who's the best to invest in? And this was something that I hadn't even thought about, but I think it's a good question. And he wrote, for example, high performers, new leaders, so your young professionals, looking for new skills and open to new positions and other functions. Do you invest in those, or do you invest in career professionals that already have a lot of experience but are lacking, some more recent skill requirements? For example, advanced analytics, modeling software, project management, things like that. So when you think about, the young professionals, the new hires, that group provides the best long-term investment, as well as well-rounded, innovative potential future leaders. But the payoff is often not immediate, right? There's an investment of time there, and that payoff for that investment you're making in their training and their development, you're not going to see that, immediately. And you always run the risk, which is a big risk these days, that, once you make that investment in that individual, they're actually going to go off and leave the company and go somewhere else. So, that's something that's I've talked about in the past and written about in the past, and it's part of the whole, talent management and shortage of talent conversation that we've been having now for quite some time. But if you make the investment in kind of the career professionals, more seasoned executives, he says, the second group tends to use an immediate, you tend to see an immediate return on investment, teaching someone better negotiation and analytical skills that they can apply right away. But that ceiling on that return is also, generally lower. So those are really, the other questions that, even if you have the time, even if you have the money for leadership development education, you really have to take a step back and really, think about and answer, in order to, make sure that you're taking an effective path with regards to your strategy regarding leadership development and education. But and these are all basically all those questions. We could probably spend, whole episodes talking on all those questions. But let's get to the real question, or the question I want to, the key takeaway that I want to communicate today, and that is, why invest, time and money in leadership development and education. And the simple answer that I use is, comes from, Kenneth Blanchard, who is a leadership development expert. And, in one of his books, he wrote, when you stop learning, you stop leading. When you stop learning, you stop leading. And I thought that really, captured very succinctly and clearly, the value of leadership development and education. Because when you think about it, the pursuit of knowledge, the pursuit of answers to questions that are always coming up, that's what leads to new ideas, right? That's what drives innovation in all aspects of business, whether it's product development, whether it's new ideas around how to work more effectively, or new processes, new ideas around how you can leverage technology more effectively, within your operations, so on and so forth. So again, it's this, the curiosity, the asking questions, and then going out and seeking answers to those questions, that really drives innovation. And that's one of those buzz terms of supply chain logistics today, in terms of the importance of innovation in order to, remain, in order to stay ahead of the curve, in order to provide a differentiating, value to your customers, and outperform the competition. And really, the way to innovate is through learning, through asking questions. And this is particularly true in supply chain logistics, today, because the environment is so dynamic. I always, one of the questions I like to ask executives, when I talk to them and in conferences is, if you were to write a supply chain and logistics, textbook today, what do you think the shelf life of that book is? And, I think the most common answer I get is, maybe 2 years, right? I mean, certainly there are, certain fundamentals of supply chain management and logistics that are, timeless, and some of the fundamentals, are always timeless. But when you think about a lot of the emerging trends that are happening out there, I mean, the industry is just changing so quickly. I mean, if you would have written a book on supply chain logistics 5 years ago, you probably didn't have much in it about mobile, the impact that mobile technologies and social media, social networking might be having on supply chains. You probably wouldn't have written much about omni-channel retailing and what's happening there. Um, you know, and when you think about all the changes and regulations that are constantly happening, whether it's hours of service or CSA, um, the reality is that the industry is continuously changing, whether it's technology, whether it's regulations, whether it's the business environment and climate, whether it's the competitive landscape, that you really have to keep learning, keep asking those questions, keep having to have a pulse on all of these things, to truly remain effective, moving forward. So, when you stop learning, you stop leading. That is true in supply chain, and that is particularly true in supply chain logistics, because the business environment is changing so quickly and so often that you've got to keep pace with all that change. You've got to keep learning. You've got to understand, what these new challenges and risks and opportunities are, and find creative solutions to them, in order to address them effectively. So I'm going to wrap up with some recommendations, right? So how do you get leadership development and education back on your budget? How do you get it on your calendar? The first recommendation is to align your leadership development and education investment with your key initiatives. So this is one of the key things. Going back to how do you quantify the ROI? How do you answer those questions from the CEO and the CFO? And really, the best way to quantify it is to really think through your strategic initiatives in the coming year. What are some of those goals that you're trying to achieve? Maybe there's new initiatives. Maybe you're looking to initiate operations in China or somewhere overseas. Maybe you're looking to bring some operations back, close to home, onshoring. Maybe you're looking to outsource for the first time. And what are the questions that you have around those key initiatives? And then find learning opportunities, whether they're conferences, whether they're workshops, whether they're webcasts, whether they're the opportunity maybe to bring together small groups of people to talk through some of those questions, right? So those are the things you should prioritize and invest in, because you're able to then make that link a little bit easier between the investments you're making in leadership development and education with kind of your strategic objectives and your financial goals that you've set for yourself in the coming year. And again, that goes back to the comment that that Director of Transportation made, that I talked about, in terms of what is it that you want to learn? What is it that you want your people to learn? That's part of that, right? And that's going to help overall in terms of connecting those dots. The second recommendation is don't find the time for leadership development education. You have to make the time. The reality is, if you try to find the time, you're never going to find it. You've got to make it a personal priority, and that's the only way that it's going to work out. So when I talk to executives that do invest in this, that's the one thing that they say. Adrian, I see this as being important. I see this as important for my career path. I see this as important in order for me to meet my objectives for the coming year, and I make it a priority. I try to, I look for opportunities where I can become more efficient during my workday. I look for things that I can perhaps allocate responsibilities that I can allocate to other people that I don't necessarily need to be doing myself, and I make that time. Whether it's at the beginning of the day on Fridays, or it's at the end of the day, or it's during work off hours. I put it on my calendar. I'm going to spend 1 hour a week, 2 hours a week, just reading on what's happening out there, attending webcasts. I'm going to find those 2 or 3 events that align with my strategic objectives and the things that I need to get accomplished this year, and those are the events I'm going to attend. So you've got to make the time, okay? If you say I'm going to try to find it, you'll never find it. It's got to be a priority. You've got to make it a priority. The third recommendation is really to start the process with new hires. and work with HR, your human resources organization, to really think through the types of skills and knowledge that you expect your future leaders to have. Again, that align with where your company is moving, the strategic direction of your company, what you need to accomplish not only this year but perhaps over the next 3 to 5 years, and then really define a program and look at the different learning opportunities that are out there and programs that are out there to really put together a program that aligns with those skills and knowledge that the people you bring into the organization you want to grow and develop, as well as the executives you already have in place that you want to kind of fine tune or complement their existing experience and skills. Define those up front, work with HR to put a program together and really start at the very beginning when you bring someone in. Certainly when I started my career, and I've talked about this in other episodes, I started my career at Motorola. At the time, Motorola had Motorola University. I think, looking back at that experience and the defined program that they had in terms of, the type of skills, the type of classes that they were offering, new hires and young professionals to prepare them for leadership positions on the road. When I look back on that, I think that's made a lot of, big difference in terms of where I am in my career today. And it really all started because at the time, Motorola took the time to really think through those skills and requirements. They made the investment, when they had Motorola University to put those classes and curriculum together. And I think, going back to that is something, and thinking through that is something that's very important for all companies too. Whether you do it in house with your own, university, or again you work with educational partners, to do that. Um, and the final recommendation, and this one's a little bit again aligned with kind of my passion and kind of my company, but really is to take the most underutilized path to knowledge, which is peer-to-peer learning and networking. In the survey that I mentioned that I conducted with supply chain logistics executives, I asked them. I said, what is your in your opinion the best source for practical knowledge and advice? The best source to give you answers to the questions you have related to your strategic objectives, related to challenges and opportunities you're facing today. And by a wide margin, the number one response was, my peers, other executives that have already addressed and overcome the challenges and opportunities that I'm facing today. And that's part of the big reason why, part of the value of going to conferences, right? You had that face-to-face interaction. You're able to network with peers and really, even if it's just through a lunch conversation or a cocktail conversation, you can learn so much in just a 1 hour conversation with a peer that, again, has walked in your shoes and can provide you with some good practical and knowledge and advice that you can immediately apply, to your organization. But beyond, just those face-to-face encounters and other opportunities, to communicate and network with your peers. As you know, I'm a big proponent of social networking and kind of leveraging technology, to facilitate peer-to-peer learning and networking. Talking logistics, what we're doing here today is an example of that. Certainly this is our first year, and one of my goals is really providing the opportunity for the supply chain logistics community to engage with supply chain logistics thought leaders and newsmakers. This is an opportunity for you to ask questions of supply chain executives, educators, others that can provide you with, again, that knowledge and advice that, again, is so valuable coming from someone that's, also in the front lines. So I encourage you to, leverage, opportunities such as talking logistics, such as, some of the social networking, groups that are out there, and leverage those more effectively as well. And certainly that's something that I continue to work on with, with Adelante, my company, and the things that we're looking to do there with young professionals. But again, I think moving forward, peer-to-peer learning and networking, in my opinion, obviously I'm a little bit biased here, but in my opinion, is really the ideal path when you think about kind of the dynamic nature of supply chain logistics, because things are happening so quickly and changing so quickly that really, the best way, or one of the best ways to keep a pulse on that and really, um, you know, get answers to the questions that you might have around this changing environment is to communicate and collaborate, with your peers. So with that, that wraps up my thoughts on this topic. Certainly, if you've got any questions or comments of your own, feel free to go to the website talkinglogistics.com and find this episode if you're watching this on demand, and post a question there, and I'll be able to I'll be happy to respond then. We've got some great episodes coming up in October, some great guests. So check the website too, and the email for those announcements. I also invite you to, if you haven't signed up for our newsletter or haven't followed us on some of these social media streams, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and so on, go ahead and follow us there as well. That way you can stay up to date in terms of future episodes that we have, future guests that we have, and so on. So again, thank you very much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.